Today is a special day. We are hosting Eric Wahlforss, the founder of SoundCloud, and one of the biggest names in the music industry, and the founder of Dance, leading e-bike subscription business out of Berlin.
Bought the first Mac laptop where you could reasonably make music only on the laptop. And people were like, you're insane. What are you doing? You can't make music without hardware, right? Polish singer in the middle of kind of nowhere in Poland somewhere. And then one day she wakes up with a comment from Snoop Dogg on her track. Yeah, it was all about the product. I think that's the formula in our case that seems to be working.
Well, I was very much looking forward to finally get the chance to get you on a podcast, Eric. So here we are. Very excited to have you. Why don't you just do a 2-sentence introduction of yourself?
Sure. No, it's a pleasure to be here. It's super, super fun. So my name is Eric. I'm from Stockholm, Sweden originally, but I came to Berlin actually 18 years ago now almost to start SoundCloud. The artist-powered music streaming service that I ended up working on for over 12 years. And then, stepped down from it and built another company, Dance, which I guess we'll talk about. And now here in Berlin with two small boys and my wife, and having lots of fun.
Yeah, two really outstanding brands that you've created in different verticals. So that's really impressive and amazing. So you definitely know a thing or two about building great companies. But how did you become a builder and entrepreneur in the first place? Did you always have this passion or feeling that you want to do it, or was it by chance? What happened?
Yeah. So I think both of my parents were in the creative spaces, right? So my father was an industrial designer, my mother a musician. She conducted a choir, she played the organ and so on. So I grew up feeling that was kind of the safe path, meaning creative expression, anything that had to do with that was sort of where I saw myself. And I found myself doing a bunch of different projects, things back in the day, I used to make small computer games. I made music on a computer. I think I was 12 years old or something like that. And then ended up doing some movies, sort of in the mid 90s with, cheap cameras and for some of the first.
That was before there was software for it, right? You basically had to.
Yeah, it was around the time when software started to happen, where you could actually start making movies on a computer. I feel like I was really part of that generation where you could all of a sudden do all of these things on a computer. I ended up I had a studio making music in the end of the 90s. This was, I think I started building it 97, 98 maybe. Yeah. And then 99, I ended up selling it and bought the first Mac laptop where you could reasonably make music only on the laptop, right? And people were like, you're insane. What are you doing? You can't make music without hardware, right?
Yeah.
You can't make it only on the computer. So I feel I guess in hindsight, I was a bit of a pioneer in that sense. I was sort of a digital nomad before the word existed. Yeah. So I didn't know what entrepreneurship was really. I didn't know what the startup was. I ended up coming to Berlin 2000, and what I was building at that point, I was building a crowdfunding network for artists and activists, kind of a web platform, but I was also doing music. And then I kind of walked into a music label and they wanted to release the music at the time.
What kind of music was that? Kind of the techno electro music that was popular back?
Yeah, it was electronic music, very sample based. It was more listening music than dance music, but it had influences from dance music. And then ended up coming back to Berlin 2001, thinking I would make music, but then ended up long story short, ended up being hired by this company that turned out it was Berlin's first startup, pretty much, one of the very first proper startups in Berlin. And it was quite a chaotic, operation there. The company was called Gate 5. And they were building sort of like Google Maps before Google Maps. And we were working on that. And like I got completely sort of like immersed into that.
And what was your role? What did you were coding? Or?
I was sort of a technical product manager type person. So I was wearing multiple hats. I didn't do a great job, I think, at it. I was just keen on like learning a bunch of stuff. Like I ended up learning about how to not run a company, I think, from that company. And then, I mean, it was just
what were the most common biggest mistakes that happened there? Or?
God, I mean, it was just so chaotic, like that whole enterprise. Like you walked into the first floor, like they were in this like industrial building on Schönhauser Allee in Berlin, and you walked into the first floor and it was like full of these like suits essentially, and like ex-BCG people sort of thinking that they were running the company. But then you walked into the second floor and like immediately when you opened the door, you could smell the pot. Like people were smoking like in the office. So it was like a bunch of nerds with hoodies, and there was like a server where they were streaming, like they were pirating movies, like all kinds of weird things were going on there. So it was very, very disorganized. But anyway, that was a startup, and they ended up actually selling years later, or a couple of years later, to Nokia for about 300 million.
Wow!
It ended up being one of Europe's, I think, biggest, I guess, startup successes at the time. And then Christoph Mayer, the guy one of the people who started it, ended up becoming a business angel, and he then a couple of years after that became the first investor in SoundCloud. And so I learned. This was 2001, 2002, when I was working there. And that's sort of where I understood like, so you can actually channel your creativity and use like a company as a platform to kind of build new products and services and kind of do cool things.
That's amazing. And I mean, was that one of the main trigger points or the main points where you said, okay, I want to start a company because I see it's possible? And you can build a business even if there's like a bunch of BCG type of suits in the first floor. You can still sell for 300 million. I can do it better. Was that kind of, the epiphany of the moment where you said, I can do it as well? Yeah,
I mean, again, to make a long story short, after I worked at Gate 5, I ended up traveling on trains through Europe for almost a year, and I finally then released my album on that same label in Berlin. This was 2003. That same year, I then started studying engineering in Stockholm with a sort of computer science focus and some business elements in there as well, and then ended up meeting my now co-founder. Alex, or my co-founder for SoundCloud, and also actually for Dance. And we ended up starting to do projects together. And we also weren't quite sure, are we going to start a company here? Like, what are we actually doing? It was sort of like also sort of like academia as well. We ended up doing our thesis in the Bay Area actually for 3 months. We wrote about social software, essentially, and trust in social networks. And this was 2006. But then we realized, spending months in SF, meeting all of these cool companies and all of these incredible entrepreneurs, we got very excited about building something big on the internet, basically. And we were toying with all kinds of weird ideas before then finally, realizing that like the big itch that we both had was really music, right? Because we were
and actually also DJing at the time, or.
I had, in parallel to studying engineering, I had been for a while there, like between 2003, 2006, pretty much, I spent many weekends touring, right? So with basically playing in various clubs across the world. So I ended up going to Japan, to Russia, to Ibiza, to various places in Europe, even to South Africa, actually. Even I went to Johannesburg, Cape Town, like all kinds of places while studying. Sometimes I was sitting, studying for an exam on the airplane, going somewhere and then playing, and so it was a very interesting time. But I also knew how to build websites, knew how to code. And felt the frustration of like every time you wanted to share a piece of music, it was just an awful experience, right? You uploaded something to a shady website, your music would be surrounded by porn and gambling ads. You were sharing and people had to download a file on the other side. It was just very clunky.
And it was always at the risk of doing something illegal, right? So that came on top of it, no? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So that whole experience was just horrible. And both Alex and I had that, because Alex had also been working actually with film music, and he also had a studio. He was also making a bunch of music. So the two of us really felt the pain, and then realized, like, yeah, actually, there's still a big white space on the internet.
Yeah.
In that, yeah.
And how did you go about it? Did you have because obviously that's the best thing, if you I have passion for something, kind of fits perfectly to my DNA and to what I'm interested in. So I mean, that's almost like a gift to start a company in that space. But did you start with some sort of business plan, or did you have clear-cut idea of where this company would go down the road, or did you just get started and try to see where it ends up?
Yeah. I mean, it was all about the product, right? It wasn't so much about the business. Like we obviously we had our inspirations at the time. I know that 37 Signal was one of these prominent companies. They also had one of the founders of that company had built Rails, the whole framework, which is still popular today, where he was easier and quicker to build websites, and they had a subscription service. So they had a very straightforward service, and they were always saying just find customers who actually are willing to pay for your service. So our idea was super simple: we'll make a great product, and then we'll have a premium version of it where you get more features. And it was really catered for artists, right? So it was all about artists sharing their creations. And then we ended up starting in private beta, and we ended up staying in private beta for about a year and a half before then finally opening the service. And then when we opened it on that same day, we also unveiled the sort of the premium tier of the service. And that ended up starting to work pretty quickly. And the idea at the core was extremely simple. And it's actually one of the things that I'm the most proud of still, is that it's still the idea that works today, which is you share a piece of music on SoundCloud. You can share whatever you want to share. Piece of audio, really. You can share whatever there. And we will make that piece of music sort of more tangible, more visual, and we'll turn it into like a social piece of content. So you can go and have a conversation about it. You can share it. And it sort of makes music a little less abstract. And that's the thing that I think started to work pretty quickly and then continues to work to this day.
And how did you, very impressive. How did you go about getting those first 1,000, 5,000, both listeners, but also the first few hundred artists, because that's obviously for any company that's about to build this network, the trickiest moment, right?
Totally. I mean, there were definitely a few months there where like the product sort of wasn't good enough. I mean, we launched, I believe, from starting to put down the first line of code to actually launching in private beta and having an actual upload flow working, some kind of sharing flow. It was all private sharing first. It wasn't like public sharing, but private sharing of music, and then registering an account, maybe being able to place a comment on a track and so on. That sort of core functionality took us about 3 weeks to go online with. So after 3 weeks, we opened the site to a few friends. It's a funny story is like, as we deployed the first functioning version of the website where you could actually sign up, my friend walks in, a friend from Stockholm who was visiting Berlin, who was also like a web developer, designer. He walks into our room, which was like a conference room. We had squatted in another office. He walks in, he's like, "Oh, cool. Is that your new website? I'm going to sign up." And then he signed up and became user ID number 1. And he's still user ID number 1. And then I signed up and I became user number 2.
Damn, you missed the number 1 by a few minutes.
At one point, we had a bug on the website where all messages got sent to user ID number 1. So he calls me at some point, a couple of years into it. He's like, I woke up this morning and I had like 20,000 emails in my inbox. Like, what is happening? So yeah. Anyhow, no, and I mean, those first few months like were super tough. I mean, MySpace, if you remember, was the biggest site on the internet. So MySpace had 100 million monthly.
And they were big on music.
They were huge. I mean, they had every artist on there. You could put your music on there. You could kind of share your music on there. It was an awful piece of crap website. Yeah. That was the problem with it. But it was just everyone was there. And in terms of time spent, they were the biggest site on the internet ahead of Google and everyone else. So we were like, well, okay, so this is going to be hard. So I had built up, I had probably like 2,000 followers or friends or whatever you call it on MySpace because my music was there, right? So there were fans basically of mine, and there were like some artists that I knew. And so I remember, early I was like messaging every single person I knew of those, 2,000, and we're like, hey, there's like another way to share music, like SoundCloud. And it was hard. I mean, like those first few months were very hard. But then we found a couple of different like unlocks. So at the time, music blogs were really a big thing. Mm-hmm. So people were posting music on these blogs, which is sort of before really social media took hold, before Twitter and so on. So Twitter was like launched around the same time as SoundCloud. I'm one of the first users on Twitter as well.
Did you get the number 2?
Not number 2. I'm like number 500, something like 400, amazing, something like this. So Twitter was launched basically just a few months before SoundCloud. And but around the time, blogging was huge, right? So there were all these like music blogs, and we then found out like we made a widget where you could share. So basically, embedded player where you could share music on your music blog, and we also had made a widget for receiving music. So we made a sort of like bi-directional flow. Then I remember we wrote like a Python script to basically find all music blogs on the internet. Yeah. And that script came up with like 20,000 music blogs. And then we had like a bunch of interns and I think us as well. Like we were basically manually painstakingly like going to every one of those websites. I think we parsed out like the email addresses with like some other script, try to basically find them all and then approach them all like sort of personally and had them embed these widgets on their blogs. And that's actually one of the biggest, I think, boosts we had in the early days in terms of growing.
So the lesson there is there's no shortcut. Even if you have a good product, you basically just need to go out and share the news and it's work. It's a lot of manual work.
Definitely. Yeah. I think growth was a big part. Like we were actually good at growth, right? Yeah. Like this is one of the things we actually did pretty well. I mean, we were obviously like obsessing over the core product and everything, but we also always had a kind of a growth muscle, sort of growth DNA, bunch of growth hackers and stuff on our team. So we knew a few of those. Like we didn't know, for example, online marketing at all. Yeah. Like online marketing was like not our game. I mean, the first couple of years we didn't spend $1 on marketing, right?
And so you basically went out and tried to see who else has traffic, who are kind of the opinion leaders, who are kind of the big influencers, so to say, before influencers existed, but blogs and other partners who people listen to, and then just try to partner up with them or get embedded in them.
Totally. I mean, the thing that then started working really well was if you're an artist, like all you want is that your music is getting heard. So we then created some tools, import your email lists, import your address book, whatever, and share to like everyone make, creating a link very easy. And
then you have the artists basically doing some of the work. So
the artists were doing the marketing essentially for us. And then they, of course, have a bunch of DJs and artists in their network. And so then they get on the platform. And then we had a very easy way to kind of sign up to listen. So we had a viral loop from pretty early on that really started working.
And that's, I think, where you probably made the switch from growth hacking, so to say, to to almost kind of investing into community building, right? So what would you say was kind of the secret sauce in creating this authentic community, creating a community where everyone's having this ownership and wanting to share and
yeah, totally. I mean, we had actually community guidelines that we put online, I believe, even from the first version of the website. And then one of our first employees is this guy, David, who ended up being our community, I forget what we called it, like head of community or community manager.
Yeah.
And he ended up building a ton of relationships, like personal relationships with people on the site. We ended up curating like stories from people on the site. And I mean, pretty early on, we had like incredible things happening. Like, for example, at some point, there's this Polish singer, like in the middle of kind of nowhere in Poland somewhere. And then one day she wakes up with a comment from Snoop Dogg on her track. And then she's like, what is this, spam or whatever, right? Like someone is impersonating Snoop Dogg. And then it turns out, no, it was actually Snoop Dogg. And then he DM'd her and said like, I love your music. Should we just make something together? And they ended up flying her into LA. Like first he came visiting her, like randomly in Poland somewhere. They flew back to LA together, like made music together, which they released. Yeah. And then actually that same year, like we had them on stage at...
And what was the song, do you remember?
South by Southwest. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was like him obviously rapping, and then she was singing the chorus and stuff.
That's the best advertisement you could ever do for the platform, right?
Totally. I mean, we literally had a bunch of those things happening. Like it's still today, like that's really the case. But like even in these early years, you had some of these like rappers in particular. I mean, I guess DJs, rappers, some producers are really early adopters of technology. So they were like super excited about this new platform, right? So they were playing with it, trying it. Richie Houghton is another one. A bunch of these like early adopters, right?
And did they also kind of how was the user feedback? I mean, did you always reach out to some of those artists and say, what do you think? Did they all have kind of feedbacks or wanted to kind of get involved in the product? I'm sure you have a few interesting stories.
Totally.
There, I guess.
I mean, in the early years, like I was doing a bunch of support, right? I was basically one of the support staff. So I just responded to probably, I don't know, like thousands or thousands, I don't know if it was thousands, but like many hundreds of, user feedback at the time. And I always told people, and I still do honestly today, and it's the same with dance, we're like, please just share your honest view of like how you feel about this product and what are the like crappy things about it that we should fix. And, just like hit me with your brutally honest feedback. Yeah. Right. And I think that really works.
I think that's one of the underestimated, character traits of an amazing founder, right? That you are on a strategic level maybe, but at times you just need to be very much in the details and be very close to customers to know your product, right? So I think
down to the metal. I mean, I think, and we still do that with dance, which I think is amazing when you have like a very solid, nimble team that can move fast. Like with SoundCloud, we had it sometimes where I saw something on a forum. Yeah. I literally went in, just edited whatever files were necessary. And so, something would have gotten posted like 20 minutes ago in the like support community. And then 20 minutes later, I'm there, I'm like, it's fixed, wow. And like, this is the kind of feedback loop that you want. And we try to, sustain that for as long as possible. And we still have that with dance, actually, because we have much lower scale. It's, we're still able to respond super quickly to a bunch of those things. Yeah. So it's been great, actually.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll talk about dance in a sec, but maybe just one or two last questions on SoundCloud. So basically you could say you almost, like a lot of really big artists emerged because of SoundCloud, right? So I don't know what the biggest names are, but Justin Bieber or somewhere else. Like there's a lot of names that you kind of co-created almost, right?
Yeah. I think Billie Eilish is someone who was just recently, I mean, she was talking about it as well. And she was like, yeah, SoundCloud was pretty much the platform for me. So there are a few of those examples for sure. I mean, I think what was cool at some point was we had entire genres that basically happened on SoundCloud, right? So there was this thing on SoundCloud rap. If you Google SoundCloud rap, I mean, there's a lot of articles about it. And then SoundCloud rap became SoundCloud Arab, right? So like you went to to Egypt or something, and you'd have like the Egypt version of that, right? So there's so those things all happen for sure. I mean, I think it's very thankful to build a brand around creators, right? And people are just expressing themselves all the time, right? Because they will build the brand for you.
They're very passionate. If it goes well, I mean, it can also tip into the other direction, I guess.
Totally.
But if it goes well, they're very passionate about it.
Yeah.
And when did this happen? That because SoundCloud always became a verb, right? When you Google things, you SoundCloud things, like this pivot or this evolution to a love brand. Did you or the company do something to kind of make that happen, or did it just occur?
I think, I mean, I wish I could say like there's this one thing we did. I think a lot of it had to do with just letting the artists shine on the platform and giving them kind of a stage and not getting in the way of that, sort of amplifying that. And then in a lot of the marketing and the branding that we did, it was all about authentically kind of and very, it's like in a very colloquial way, an authentic way, just letting those artists do their thing and standing behind it, not trying to associate ourselves too much with any one, particular genre.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge in a way, because you want to also, stick out as a brand, right? You don't just want to be this like completely generic platform, right? But it's, I think that's how the brand was really built in SoundCloud's case.
Nice. And I think nowadays it's also used in so many different categories and verticals, right? So, like, do you have anecdotes where you were like, I didn't know that people are using the SoundCloud logo or the SoundCloud brand in this dimension or this dimension? Like, is there any funny anecdotes that you can share?
I mean, there are actually quite a lot of those anecdotes. I think probably the one that pops into my mind is like, we do have a pill on Ibiza that is the SoundCloud logo,
no
right?
way.
So yeah, there is that. You can.
What does the pill do?
I don't want to know, and I haven't tried it, but it does exist.
That's when you know as a brand that you made it, if you have a pill in Ibiza named after you. That's so funny. And then obviously you created one of the, I think, biggest brands in the tech world and the music world that shapes kind of millions of people. And then you basically said, I want to do it again. I want to start a new company. Why?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why? I mean, after having done anything for 12 years, like, it's a time where a lot of people start reflecting, sort of like, am I still enjoying this? Am I still, and in my case, I had been pulled into climate, actually. Mm-hmm. This was something that started really around the time of the Paris Accord that was happening. This was 2015. I started reading about things, and I mean, I had already had a connection to that always had a connection growing up, because my father was sort of active in that space as well. So I remember, conversations in the 90s, when I was like super young, about wind power, electric cars, all kinds of things in that space with my father, actually. And
so you're 30 years early, basically, yeah?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, there had been a lot of people doing things. I mean, the year before we started SoundCloud, I watched Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, which came out 2006. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is really heading the wrong direction. Like, this is pretty awful. And then around the time of the Paris Agreement, this essentially then 10 years later, you realize that pretty much everything is like completely going off the rails, and like we haven't delivered on any promises. Like, if anything, things are essentially accelerating in the wrong direction. And so I started getting pulled into that kind of on the side, starting investing in some companies in the space as an angel investor. And then over time, I felt the sort of combination of the S-curve of, let's say, streaming music had reached a kind of more incremental state. So by sort of early in 2019, which is when I decided to step down, you could really feel that streaming as a category had gone from not being something that people even understood. If you would have said streaming when we started SoundCloud, people would be like, what do you mean streaming? Like, what is that? Right. Yeah. Whereas now it was like everyone was streaming, so it felt like, we had built a small piece of kind of the internet and had built, become a part of the streaming story in the world, which was super, super fun. But the journey had kind of reached a new stage. And so I felt like it was the right time for me to look at what could be next. And I ended up taking a sabbatical where I looked only at climate tech really and different climate topics. And I ended up investing.
So what were the options? Like what did you?
Oh, I mean, I looked at a lot of different things. I looked at things like solar deployment, electric mobility. I looked at carbon offsets and that whole universe. I looked at the grid stuff, grid technology. And one of the things I realized was that like I'm not the right entrepreneur for a lot of the topics in that space, right? A lot of these things are like heavy lifting, industrial tech, right? Whether it's like giant scale carbon capture or grid batteries or, like
and you felt you're more great at building amazing brands and being a good consumer person, right?
Yeah, precisely. Just felt like, okay, those are kind of my strengths. So in the end, like long story short, we were toying with this idea of like renting various products and services and, which service, like which product category could really be turned into a service and could you create like a more circular type company on that premise. And then we arrived at this, or actually I was taking a long walk with a friend in Stockholm and he turned around saying like, yeah, I just bought an e-bike, but like I so wish I could just have rented it or just subscribed to it because it's just such a headache to own it. And I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. And like, it's so obvious that I'm sure that there's like a ton of people doing that. And then I was starting to research it and I realized like there's
what are the main headaches that you feel are most common for people?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about e-bikes is that it's a complex electric vehicle. It's not a regular bike, like, so your typical like bike repair store or whatever on the corner, they will not be able to repair it easily, right? Yeah. Typically that's what happens. And you end up waiting for special parts, specialty, competency as well to come in and basically fix your vehicle. And this is now your, main way of commuting or getting around the city. So any day without it, it's very annoying and painful. And then, of course, these things also tend to get stolen, right? So you have theft.
Absolutely.
And then you're kind of left on your own. If you buy a bike somewhere, they're like, oh yeah, get a lock, try and figure it out, right? Yeah. And that's just like not a great proposition. So that was like the original headache in a way. And I've never owned a car. I've always had a bike, right? And I've always been like a huge fan of bikes. And I realized like e-bikes are a complete revolution for the bike, right? E-bikes are just this like completely disruptive thing. It sort of looks like a bike, but it's really a different category altogether.
You don't arrive sweating. You just, sit down and glide smoothly through a city, right? I mean, no matter what the weather is. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Totally. And there's just like all these problems where like, I go back to Stockholm, for example, today, and I've been in Berlin now for 18 years. And when I left Stockholm, congestion was not really an issue, to be honest. But when I come back now, congestion in Stockholm is brutal. So what's happened in all of the cities around the world is just, we've just deployed more and more cars. Yeah. And so you have congestion, noise, pollution, like all kinds of problems in cities that are becoming like, they're kind of like it's coming to a head where like you basically cannot really deploy more cars in some cities. So case in point is obviously Paris, where like if you've been to Paris and tried to take an Uber, like it's basically impossible for many hours of the day. Like
in a lot of cities, like when you compare on Google Maps, it takes way longer to get from A to B. London, for instance.
Yeah,
bicycle is like half the time than a car, right? And metro is also quicker. So I think they've already reached that tipping point where it always takes longer with a car than with a bike, right?
Totally. And then you have the e-bike, which is like not a bike, right? So an e-bike is just way more compelling, and you see that with like customers basically loving the product and typically won't go back to regular bikes. Like if you've been on an e-bike, you won't typically go back to regular bike. It's a bit like, it's a similar thing when like you get a new iPhone or something. And you're like, okay, this is nice. Like I can tell it's faster, it's nicer. Yeah. But then you go back to your old iPhone and you're like, oh God, like how was I using this for 2 years? Like it's so slow, it's like so annoying. Yeah. It's a similar thing with e-bikes where it's like, it's sort of like, it's nice and delightful being on one. But then when you go back, you're like, oh God, like this doesn't work,
So where do you feel, are you in the adaptation curve? Is it like, do you have to create the market or create the market with others, or do people have a good understanding of what an e-bike is and you just are the market leader, so to say, because you're pushing a new product almost, but also a new way of using the product, which is subscription versus buying, right? So is that a challenge to do both at the same time?
Totally. I think you have, it's exactly the right point. I think it's not obvious to a lot of people how different an e-bike is versus a regular bike. So like that's the first thing. And then of course, a lot of people have experienced the pain of bike ownership. So people are vaguely familiar kind of with those pains for sure, and some more than others. So it's really like an educational effort. I mean, it's and there's a lot of examples of this, I think, when you have products that go from product to service essentially. And I was talking with Dominic from HelloFresh early on in the dance journey, and he was saying the same thing. Like a lot of what they had to do was just educate people on like, this is now a thing that you can do,
and that you have to go do through heavy marketing. Or how did you go about it? How did you educate or push it to people?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I think we've been successful ultimately has a lot to do with simply just having a great product that people love. And the way we measure it is simply with NPS. And so we have a very high NPS score, and we try to chip away. If we analyze the NPS results and we look at like the top 5 detractors, we try to really chip away at those.
So what do people love the most about dance bikes?
They love the convenience, right? They love the service. Typically, like what we see as well is if you've had service once, which is, everything is basically digital, right? So I haven't really explained the product here, but essentially it's the way it works is like you download an app, you push a button. In Paris, for example, you go to a few drop-off locations where we're partnered with this like digital garage partners. So you can go to a few very nice like branded locations essentially in the city. You pick up your vehicle, you scan it with a QR code, you do video onboarding, and then you ride away. And then it's your own bike. You can keep it for as long as you want. If anything happens to it, you push a button in the app and you basically snap a photo and say, I have a problem XYZ with my vehicle, or it got stolen, or whatever it is. You push that button, and then typically within 24 hours, we will then repair, replace, do whatever is necessary with the vehicle. And when people have experienced that once, like that's essentially the magic that retains people. So we see that.
So when you have an issue and you're able to solve it really quickly, that's what makes them
totally. It's like it turns a moment of like frustration into a moment of like wow and delight, right? And that's the premise of dance, really.
And it's cool. And I think it's also unique because you could have gone also the other way when it comes to product, right? Because in the mobility space, you have the car manufacturers that are all about brand and product. But you also have in the micromobility space, the scooter brands where all the scooters look the same. It's kind of, you have 5 apps and it's almost interchangeable, right? So you had the decision to go into either direction. And it seems like you went more into the car manufacturer brand is important direction.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think for any any industry, right? You have to think about, does brand matter or not, right? And I think in our case, like the brand slider is up towards, I don't know, 70% or something like that. It's not like the only thing that matters, but it's definitely one of the things that absolutely key to get right. And then it's this combination of sort of product love and brand love. So getting those things to work, and then it becomes almost like a viral phenomenon. I mean, that's what we have in Paris, where like we see, so our biggest channel is referrals, right? So more than a third of all signups are coming through our referral scheme in the app, where it's like a incentivized referral scheme, right? So people share a link on WhatsApp, they get something, and their friend gets something, right? And then that's how Dance grows, really.
Yeah. Plus, I think the other great thing about, I mean, there's a lot of downsides of having a physical product. Yeah, we just briefly talked about it. You have to actually produce it.
Sure,
it can get delayed. There's always, hardware is just hard. You know, it's part of the word. but the big benefit is you see it on the streets, right? So I think when there's a critical mass of your products on the streets, that's when you almost cannot miss it, and you have always those touch points. Did you is there a certain number where you say, okay, if I've seen a dance bike 10 times, then that's what we aim for to kind of convert consumers, right? or is it like, do you think about it that way?
I wouldn't know the number, right, of touch points, to be honest, from the top of my head. What I will say is that we have a single player product that works really well as a single player product. And it's very similar actually to SoundCloud in the sense that it's a single player product that then becomes a kind of a network over time. So you kind of start with the utility and then you stay for that kind of the network, and the network builds over time, or those local network effects in the case of dance builds over time. So I think that's the benefit of the model, is that we don't need a lot of vehicles in a city to break even on a cash basis. So it's sort of low hundreds that we need. And those first customers are, of course, harder to win. But then you start, because our NPS score is so high, then people start, people notice it, obviously, people talk about it, and then it starts growing organically. So, and that's the thing that's been working for us in all the cities where we are. Of course, doesn't mean that the next city will work the same, but I think that's the formula in our case that seems to be working.
Yeah, that's true, because you also have the city component, which makes it extra interesting, right? Because some cities are just better for bicycling and for your product versus others. Then you have regulations, so it's actually a pretty complicated business to run in a way, right?
Yes.
You have to get a lot of things right, and then you have some externalities that also have to be right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think like when we started SoundCloud, people were very quick to do the analysis. Like, I mean, the very savvy investors, let's say, they were always like zooming in on like, okay, so you have like very powerful suppliers, meaning the record industry. Yeah. And you have some very powerful incumbents, meaning like Apple and Amazon and Google, like, who will also do music, right? So, and that's going to be your headache for the next, 15 years. And they were right, And
I was about to say, compared to the music industry, that's probably way easier, right?
and like the thing, and exactly. And dance was like very similar. It's like, ouch, you have hardware. Ouch, you have like city by city scaling. Ouch, you have ops. Like that's tough. Like those are tough pieces to crack. But I believe that for most startups, there are just the number of headaches, and you're going to just pick your kind of like trade-offs, right?
Plus, I mean, if it's a hard problem and you're able to solve it, it means there's not going to be 100 other companies that are able to solve it, right? If you make it, you're one of the few or the leading company in that space, right?
Sure.
And so I found it interesting because you talked about some of your underestimated channels that worked well for you, which kind of the referrals, obviously, and also this physical branding of having the bikes all around the city. Are there any other channels where you feel like these worked surprisingly well for us?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, we did like a kind of 360. We made a big splash like when we launched. So we had out of home, we had, you know, a bunch
Big
of influencers.
influencers,
Yeah, we
right,
had big influencers.
Who
We
were kind
actually-
of the big names that you...
Well, we had some big influencers as investors, right?
Yeah.
And we actually made sure not to have sweat equity deals or
Yeah.
anything with them, but we just had them straight up as financial investors. A bunch of them ended up doing some work for us, actually for free in the end, which is, you know, which was great. And I think what, like in the kind of influencer world, I mean, one of the things that's sort of true is that if you have a very big influencer, that will sort of like set the scene or set the tone, and then you can...
And the smaller ones
the smaller
along.
ones will then help you to actually do the work, right? And so that's kind of the approach we took.
So
and,
who were like your top 2-3 big influencers that really left a dent, you felt?
I think in Germany it was Tony Garn, probably is the biggest one.
Yeah.
And then we had Lena Gerke, so those were two. There were a few others in there, but those were two, and they were like using the vehicles that we shot some video and
It's
stuff.
an interesting choice because it's actually, for those that don't know, it's 2 supermodels, which is an interesting choice for because you could have gone with football players or musicians close to you. Like, was it just by coincidence that it worked out to be models?
I think like so we took the approach, like when we built the company and we started raising financing as well, when we took in our seed round, we already, like we had a very clear intention that we're going to, alongside of having some investors, we're also going to have like individuals on our cap table. And we started inviting like a few of our friends and then people we knew from SoundCloud times. We had like will.i.am, we have, you know, Chance the Rapper. We had a few of these like very big names, artists as well. And then over, you know, the last few years, like we've kept adding individuals to the cap table, and we didn't really expect anything like from them, you know, so we didn't have like an intent, you know, for every one of them behind it. We just knew that maybe at some point they would be able to help us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it wasn't like super strategic in that sense. And then when we started the whole influencer campaigns, I mean, we basically looked at, you know, who can we start with in our investor base? And then they knew a few influencers as well. So we kind of like opened some doors that way. And but in the end, I think a lot of it was just, you know, working actually with other influencers locally in Berlin and Paris and so on.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the channel that's really working for us in the end is it's organic, it's the visibility, it's the word of mouth and the referral stuff that works like super well for us. We do have like, of course, all the like performance intent based channels. They're very they're very efficient. They work super well for us, but we haven't like the influencer part of it and like some of those other pieces. Like is not like this is core to the model at this moment. I mean, we might come back to that. We might, you know, we'll definitely try other things with it, but that has not been the main driver of growth for us.
And how about collaborations with other brands? Because I would bet that there's a lot of brands that want to be associated with you that have a lot of reach. Maybe have you seen that work?
Right. We haven't, like we did a few collaborations now. Like next year, we're looking at potentially doing more. We are preparing for growing now in a bigger way next year. And so we are looking at that again. We had one incredible thing happening, which was that Apple reached out like out of the blue, and they basically came to Berlin. They had like a film crew of like 30 people. They basically made this whole like thing about dance, and then they spent like tens of millions of dollars. I mean, they must have been tens of millions, like basically pushing this video and they basically just had it as like a showcase for like, here's how you can use, you know, Apple products to deliver a hardware, you know, service solution. But it was like, I ended up getting pinged by so many people, like totally randomly, like also people from the US, you know, where they
when are you coming to New York? When are you coming to LA?
Yeah. And I mean, this was, of course, was kind of a dream to have that happen, but this was not planned, right? So
oh, that's amazing. I mean, that's 1 in a million, obviously, that they reach out. When you think about the customer segments, like obviously it's down the road, hopefully a product for everyone, but how do you think about, your preferred customer segments when you do marketing?
Totally. I mean, I think the way we look at dance is like we want to be the category defining brand in e-bike subscriptions, right? So we want to define and lead that category and hopefully turn that into like a multi-million customer category. And I think that, focus is very important for startups. So that's really a thing for us. I think what's really nice, like if I go to Paris now and I see our kind of early adopters in Paris, and we have less than 10,000 members in Paris, but like we do have, still not nothing, right? So, and because Paris is so dense, and people, our customers, they use the dance bikes like very actively, because 80+% of them are commuters, right? So they really use
daily,
it
during the week at least.
Yeah, they use it several. Yeah, exactly. They're basically daily users of it. So I can see our customers, right? So you can basically stand on a street corner in Paris and just like do our basically user research and see who our customers are. And to my delight, it's like all these like cool people. It's basically like urban. It's like young urban professionals. It's almost 50-50 male, female. Yeah. And it's like the people who you'd actually want using your product, right? Like it's sort of the lifestyle, product that we aspire to be. Like they are sort of a reflection of that. So I think for me, that bodes really well for the future, right? But like, it's pretty much, it's skewing younger than we thought it would as well. So it's anyone from, I don't know, like 25 to 50, but like it's skewing, it's more like 25 to 30 than, 40 to 50, right?
Nice. Amazing. Last question. I mean, you've built so many great love brands. Is there any love brand that you look up to at the moment where you kind of want to peek in and see how they do it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, there's a lot out there. One in particular that I quite like is the Nothing phone, and Nothing, I mean the brand, and they're building consumer electronics. Carl is a friend of mine, small investor in dance as well. He's just an amazing entrepreneur, and like what they built there, and I mean the brand that they built is just incredible. It's sort of like an against all odds kind of thing where you have these massive incumbents, and they have they've sold a lot of phones by now. Yeah. And their marketing and branding is just so like bold and unique, and that works, right? Yeah. It's like they have millions of followers on social media. Like it's just incredible. So that one is super inspiring. And they have worked a bunch with Teenage Engineering, which is one of my favorite hardware companies probably in the world as well. Stockholm based. Bunch of like really cool kind of hipster nerd designers. Like coming into their office is like such a cool experience. You come in there and you're like, wow, like this is like what do you call it? Like if you're like a 4-year-old and you walk into like a Legoland or something, it's like the same feeling, right? It's like, where do we get started? It's like, so
cool. Well, definitely check out the phone for sure. Eric, it's been, I feel like we could go on talking about both of the companies, and we haven't even touched your angel investments and all of that, and your DJing career. But we could go on for hours, but it's a shame that we're out of time. But thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming along, for being here. And it's been a big pleasure having you.
Thank you. Super fun.